Hello everyone, this is Haunted Mario welcoming you back to another Evidence Revealed video. This particular video will focus on audio evidence that we managed to capture at America's most haunted cemetery, and that is Bachelor's Grove Cemetery in Midlothian, Illinois. Now, Bachelor's Grove Cemetery is a location that has been on our bucket list for many years since we began our adventures with the paranormal world. So it was definitely a top priority for us to be able to investigate this location on our way back from our Waverly Hills Sanatorium overnight investigation. And I can definitely tell you that it did not disappoint. Now, the cemetery has some rather infamous history of being a dumping ground for the killings of some of the mob back in the 1920s and 1930s. The cemetery itself has actually existed since the 1800s, and it's not a very large cemetery at all, and it's located in a very obscure area of the Rubio Woods Forest Preserve, and that's in Midlothian, Illinois. It's definitely open to the public for anyone that wishes to explore it. There is a trail that leads down to it. It's only, I would say, 1/8 of a mile or so. You walk down the trail, and then the gates are open to the cemetery, and you just walk in and you can explore. And there is a creek bed that just ends right just beyond the cemetery outside the back gate. A little funny story about this location. Haunted Peach and I had been very diligent about spraying ourselves with bug repellent before we went to any location outside of California, mainly because we were not used to the type of bugs and insects that exist outside of California, so we wanted to be very prepared. And we went to Bachelor's Grove Cemetery the day after our Waverly Hills investigation. In fact, it was our Waverly Hills investigation had been the night before, and it ran through the morning, and that very same day is when we went to Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. And we arrived in Midlothian, Illinois sometime around 6 p.m. or so. We had a couple of hours of daylight. The cemetery is open until sunset, and so we had to be very careful about how we managed our time at the cemetery. But we arrived and put on our mosquito repellent bracelets. Then, out of sheer stupidity, even though I had grabbed our bug repellent can and had it in the trunk ready for us to use, I neglected to use it. Both of us actually. So we walked down the trail, and as we walked down the trail, we saw a couple walking towards us, and we asked them how much further to the cemetery. They assured us it wasn't very far, and so we went to the cemetery, and when we got there, it was absolutely beautiful. Really silent, aside from the cars on the highway that's just over the tree line. Other than that, it was pretty silent, and there were bugs and birds and whatnot. But so when we got there was no one there. So we had the benefit of being the only two people in the actual cemetery. The really crappy part was that we were not prepared for the amount of insects that surrounded the cemetery. I mentioned before that there is a creek bed that is just beyond the back gate of the cemetery, and unfortunately this creek bed is just stagnant water, and it's a breeding ground for mosquitoes. So being that we did not spray bug repellent on ourselves, we only had the mosquito repellent bracelets on, which did absolutely nothing. Our time at the cemetery was severely limited because of the amount of mosquito bites that we were getting throughout our entire time there. We managed to be there for around half an hour or so, and we explored a majority of the cemetery as best we could. We did 2 EVP sessions, one at the famous gravestone where the lady in the white dress was captured back in the 90s by a paranormal investigator taking photography of the location. It's one of the most well-known pieces of spirit photography, and we were hoping that we would be able to capture that particular spirit on camera, or perhaps get some EVPs out of this location. Well, it was very hard to concentrate because of the mosquito bites. We're constantly having to swat at bugs almost every few seconds, and our recording sessions had to be very limited. So we did one at the famous gravestone for the lady in the white dress, and then we also did one at this very large memorial gravestone for what was labeled as the Fulton family. This particular gravestone, people come by and they leave little trinkets for the memory of an infant buried at that particular memorial. So those are the 2 sessions that we did, and when we left very hastily out of the cemetery because we couldn't handle the bug bites anymore, we didn't think that we captured anything. In fact, we were pretty damn sure that we had not caught any kind of EVPs just because of the circumstances that we were in and how unfocused we were in the actual EVP session. So it went without saying that we weren't really expecting anything. However, upon review, we did manage to capture quite a few EVPs, and that's what we're here for today, to share those with you. So let's begin here with the first EVP session that we did at the famous lady in the white dress gravestone. Now this particular gravestone has sort of a checkered pattern all the way around. It's a square gravestone. It has no name on it, no dates. I tried to do some research and see who the grave belonged to, but I wasn't able to find any substantial information that definitely pinpoints the name of the person that's actually buried there. So I'm unsure if this was an actual gravesite of a person buried there, or if it's like a memorial for the whole cemetery. In either case, we definitely captured some EVPs at this particular location. So let's begin here. This is the first EVP clip we're going to review. It is from the very first EVP session. Now what I'm going to do is the same format as I've done in the previous evidence reveal videos. I'm going to play the full clip in its entirety a few times. Then I'll isolate the actual EVP clip. Then I'll replay the isolated EVP clip and give our opinions on what we have agreed on is being spoken in the actual EVP. Now for this particular evidence reveal, Haunted Peach will not be joining us, but she will definitely be here for the Waverly Hills Sanatorium evidence reveal. So this first EVP clip happened right at the beginning of the EVP session that we conducted at the checkered gravestone. 2 things are important to note here. The first is that in the recording you'll hear me acknowledge that I heard a voice. Now at the time, remember, as I was describing before, there was a couple that had been walking out of the cemetery and up the trail that we crossed on our way to the cemetery, and when we got to the cemetery there were no people there, so we were the only ones there. Now the cemetery is in a location that is surrounded by forest, so it it pretty much drowned out a lot of the noises from the highway and from anyone that may have been walking along the highway, because there were a few times where we heard people along the highway, but we could distinctly tell when those people were speaking. Now at the beginning of this recording, pretty much right after we hit the record button, you'll hear me doing an introduction. Hilariously, you'll hear Haunted Peach swatting at a mosquito, and you'll hear me acknowledge that I heard a voice. Now the voice isn't captured in the recording, but before I begin talking again, there is an EVP, there is a voice that comes through that says something. And so I'll play that full clip for you now in its entirety. I'm going to replay it a few times and listen for what sounds like a female voice speaking right before I start talking the second time. Here it is. In Midlothian, Illinois, we're going to do an EVP session. Is that a voice? We're going to do an EVP session at the Gravestone in Midlothian, Illinois. We're going to do an EVP session. Is that a voice? We're going to do an EVP session at the Gravestone in Midlothian, Illinois. We're going to do an EVP session. Is that a voice? We're going to do an EVP session at the Gravestone in Midlothian, Illinois. We're going to do an EVP session. Is that a voice? We're going to do an EVP session at the Gravestone. Okay, that was the very first EVP clip in its entirety. Again, you'll hear me giving an introduction, then you'll hear a female voice say something, and then you'll hear me talk. It happens very fast and just before I start speaking. Before I get to our opinions on what we agree is being spoken in the EVP, I'm going to isolate just the EVP itself, and you'll be able to hear exactly the female voice that we are referring to. Here is the isolated EVP clip. Okay, now that was the isolated EVP clip. You'll hear a female voice saying something, and when we analyze this EVP, we classified it as a Class B EVP, and Haunted Peach and I agree the voice that comes through is of a female, and it sounds like she is giving a command, telling us to proceed. So that is the word that we are hearing in the actual EVP. It sounds like a female voice telling me to proceed with the EVP session. So I'm going to go ahead and re-isolate the clip and play just that portion for you again. Listen closely, and if you hear something different, please let us know in the comments section down below. This is just what we have agreed upon is being spoken based on the audio output that is in the actual EVP from this potential spirit telling me to proceed with the EVP session. Here it is. Okay, so that was the EVP saying proceed. Let's move on to the second EVP that we captured during this session. You'll notice in the photograph that there is a flower, an orange flower, that was placed on the gravestone. And this was a flower that was picked by Haunted Peach. She had picked one of these flowers among others on our way down the trail to get to the cemetery. There are quite a few wildflowers that are growing on either side of the trail, so she picked a few to put on the actual gravestone. When she put the flowers down, there was apparently an immediate response that came through in the recording when she actually places the flowers on the gravestone. Now, I definitely want to say that this is an intelligent response. It is sort of a Class B / Class A EVP. Let's listen to the full clip. Here is the full recording of that moment. Here it is.
Placing down some flowers on the stone. Placing down some flowers on the stone. Placing down some flowers on the stone. Placing down some flowers on the stone.
Okay, that is the full EVP clip. We're not exactly sure yet if it's a male or female voice, but there is definitely a voice that comes through right after she acknowledges that she's putting flowers on the gravestone. An important thing to note is that at this particular moment, the audio recorders were actually on the gravestone. So this isn't something like we had the recorders in our hands and we're fiddling around with them and it was our fingers making the noise. This was just her placing the flowers down, and then a voice comes through and replies. So I'm going to go ahead and isolate just the EVP clip now and play it a few times so that you can hear the voice that we heard through the recording. And again, this is something, well, all these EVPs were not heard at the time. Here it is. Okay, that is the isolated EVP. As you can hear, there is definitely a response there. Again, we don't know if it is a male or female voice responding, but it is definitely, in our opinion, Haunted Peach and I have agreed that it is definitely an intelligent response to her placing the flowers down. It's kind of interesting what is spoken in there. Haunted Peach and I agree that we are hearing the words, "We don't need flowers." That's kind of interesting that it would say that. It's almost as if they've had too many visitors over the years coming through and leaving flowers and they're almost sick of receiving them. But Haunted Peach and I agree that we heard through the recording, "We don't need flowers." Here's the isolated EVP clip of "We Don't Need Flowers." Here it is. Okay, that was the isolated clip, "We Don't Need Flowers," and what an interesting capture from this particular location. So we're going to move on to the next EVP session that we did. Now before we get on to that, I just want to touch bases and say that we did capture additional EVPs from the first gravestone, but we're not going to feature those because those weren't Class B or Class A EVPs. So those just go into our audio files, and we may review them sometime in the future. But for now, we're focusing on the best captures that we got. So let's move on to the second EVP session. This was at the Fulton Grave Memorial Site. Now, this is a family grave site. There is a gigantic gravestone memorial that says Fulton on it. And then there's a tiny gravestone next to it that says Infant Daughter. Now, the first one at this location is an interesting one. You'll hear in the audio recording, we ask how many of the family are buried at the cemetery or at the site, and then you'll hear a voice respond in the silence. I'm just going to play the full clip here and just listen in for a voice. This will be a male voice that you'll hear coming through. Here it is. How many of your family are buried here? 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 Okay, so that was the full audio clip. You'll hear a male voice respond. We do believe that this is an intelligent response. It's definitely a male voice that comes through. So I'm going to go ahead and isolate just the EVP clip and have you listen to that now. Here it is. Alright, that is the isolated EVP clip, and when we listened to this, it was definitely interesting to hear that there was one specific word that stood out in the EVP clip. And Haunted Peach and I agree that the word that stuck out the most was 7. Being that this is a memorial for the Fulton family, it would make sense that family members would be buried at the site and/or cemetery. However, upon research, I didn't find any substantial information that would support that. So I'm not sure that what we are hearing is definitely a true statement about the family members there. I'm just reviewing the actual EVP that we captured. So here's that EVP clip again. You'll hear what sounds like, you'll hear a couple of words at the beginning. Haunted Peach and I agree that it sounds like it's saying at least, and then you'll hear 7. So the full EVP clip is at least 7. Here it is. Okay, that was the isolated EVP of the male voice responding at least 7. Let's move on to the next EVP. Now this particular EVP illustrates the issues that we were having during these recording sessions where we were constantly getting bit by mosquitoes. Now you'll hear in this full recording that you'll hear me getting bit by mosquitoes and acknowledging that. Then you'll hear a female voice say something, and it's almost kind of jokingly in a way. It's very interesting. I'll just go ahead and play the clip for you now. Listen very closely after you hear me acknowledge that I'm swatting at mosquitoes. You'll hear a female voice come through. Here's the full clip. Me, sorry, getting bit by mosquitoes. Thank you for communicating with us if you did. Me, sorry, getting bit by mosquitoes. Thank you for communicating with us if you did. Me, sorry, getting bit by mosquitoes. Thank you for communicating with us if you did. Me, sorry, getting bit by mosquitoes. Thank you for communicating with us if you did. Alright, that was the full EVP recording. You'll hear, again, me desperately swatting at mosquitoes, and then you'll hear a female voice say something. And it's definitely a full sentence that comes through, and it's quite an interesting EVP. I'm going to go ahead and isolate just the EVP now, and you'll be able to hear what this female is replying. And it definitely sounds like an older female too. Here's the isolated clip. Okay, that's the isolated EVP clip. You'll hear an older woman's voice come through, and Haunted Peach and I agree that what is being spoken here is, "You're not from here." Almost jokingly telling us that we're not used to the insects and bugs because of how frantic we were. So it's kind of funny to hear that from potentially a spirit telling us that, hey, you're not from here. So I'm going to go ahead and re-isolate the clip for you so you can hear that. It is, "You're not from here." Here it is. Okay, that was the isolated EVP clip saying, "You're not from here," in response to me being attacked by mosquitoes. Definitely one of the more comical EVPs that we've captured. Given the context of the situation, we definitely found that it was pretty funny. So let's move on to the very last EVP. This one was also caught during that session at the Fulton Memorial. Let's play the full clip. What you'll hear is both a child's voice and a female's voice come through before we acknowledge something at the memorial site. So they both happen one right after the other. So you'll hear the child's voice first, then you'll hear the woman's voice. Now the woman's voice comes through as a whisper, and the child's voice is more pronounced. So child's voice first, then the woman's whisper. All the while, Haunted Peach and I are sort of looking around this particular memorial. So here is the full audio recording. It's a memorial for a young daughter that was buried here.
You're gonna
really show her name. It says infant daughter. It's a memorial for a young daughter that was buried here.
You're gonna
really show her name. It says infant daughter. It's a memorial for a young daughter that was buried here.
You're gonna
really show her name. It says infant daughter. It's a memorial for a young daughter that was buried here.
You're gonna
really show her name. It says infant daughter. Alright, that was the full audio recording. You'll hear in the recording that we are sort of moving around the memorial and just basically having a look around it, and you'll hear what sounds like a child's voice come through. It doesn't really say anything, sounds like it just makes a noise. Then you'll hear a female whisper come through, and it says something. After it says that, you'll hear Haunted Peach and I acknowledge what we're referring to. Here is the isolated EVP clip. Listen very carefully and you'll hear the EVP that we're referring to. Here it is. Okay, that was the isolated EVP clip. Now you'll hear again the child's voice comes through, and then the whispered voice from the female. Haunted Peach and I agree that the female is saying infant, and the crazy part about that is that the whole gravestone that's there, the giant one, just says the name Fulton on it, but there is a separate small gravestone that says infant daughter, and that's what we were referring to when we start speaking again. So it's very interesting that a female voice comes through whispering the word infant before we say the word infant. Here's that isolated EVP clip again. I would definitely label this as a Class A EVP, just because for us it was very clear that the word being spoken was infant. Here it is. that was the EVP of the female saying infant at the Fulton Memorial site. So that basically covers everything that we captured in our experiences at Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. This location definitely lived up to its name as far as being haunted. I don't think that I have ever been so surprised by getting captures in a location where we seemingly didn't expect to get anything, especially given the circumstances. We essentially turned a fail into a win. There were definitely many different spirits there communicating with us in their own right, of course. But it seems like every EVP that we captured was a different spirit responding to us. Not one single EVP that we captured was the same voice. So I can definitely attest to saying that when we were there, we felt like we were being watched the entire time. And that's a feeling that can be very unnerving at times, especially when you're in a place that you don't know. But we definitely feel like we had eyes on us the entire time that we were there. And definitely something came through, and most assuredly many spirits came through to talk to us. Now, I don't always like to call something paranormal unless I have substantial evidence, and I would definitely say at this point, given all of the factors going into this particular location, the fact that we were alone in the cemetery, the voices that we heard did not sound like ours, obviously, and that most of them were intelligent responses, I would definitely classify Bachelor's Grove Cemetery as a haunted location. And the EVPs that we captured there definitely are paranormal. So thank you for joining us on this evidence reveal. This is part 2 of the evidence reveals. Part 3 will be coming very soon, and that will be the evidence reveal for our overnight Waverly Hills Sanatorium investigation. So stay tuned for that. Again, thank you all for your support. Haunted Peach and I definitely appreciate it. It's what keeps us going on this paranormal journey, and we look forward to bringing you and sharing with you the stuff that we captured at the Waverly Hills Sanatorium. So stay tuned for that, and just as always, happy haunting.